A real honor to bring back one of our panels again, another panel, excuse me. And this panel is going to be looking at financially responsible investing. And of course, it's tagged right onto the previous paper by Andy and read by Tim. And you can pretty much see that financially responsible investing can have that ESG component that should be avoided. But also, there's a very good side to it as well, and investing from a Catholic or from a Christian, from an inspired perspective, really makes a huge difference. Daniel Svogun is going to, from the Busch School of Business at the Catholic University of America, is going to be moderating the panel. He is an assistant professor of corporate finance there at the Busch School. He has a long history, not only in the corporate finance area, but has been looking at the USCCB's and researching the USCCB's financially responsible guidelines that they have put out for investments. He's going to be giving us an introduction of the other panelists, so without further ado, I ask the panel to come forward and to really give us a real sense. There's, I believe, 7 people on the panel, and give us a sense of how we might better do this financially responsible investment through our faith, through the inspiration of our morals and our values. So Daniel and company.
Well, this will be fun after that discussion.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the Napa Institute for organizing this, to my dean, Andrew Abella, for setting up a lot of these panels. Thank you for the panelists for agreeing to be here. I'm going to be as expeditious as possible in the introductions because obviously we have a lot of panelists and we want to hear their take on this important topic. So the topic we have up for discussion today is how do we understand and apply the USCCB newly revised socially responsible investment guidelines. And in order on the schedule, we have Mary Brunson, co-founder of Investing for Catholics here, Rich Todd, co-founder and CEO of Innovest, Borja Barragan, founder of AltumFaithfulInvesting, Tim Schwarzenberger, portfolio manager at Inspire Investing, John Grabowski, professor of theology at the Catholic University of America, Jeff McCroy, CEO of Christian Brothers Investment Services, and Christopher Lagan, president of Congress Asset Management Company. So thank you for being here. Okay, so I'm going to begin with questions, and we can start. If we could answer the questions in order, and you can feel free to answer any question you feel comfortable with, or contribute what you'd like on each question. We only have 5 microphones, so hopefully we can share amongst everyone with those. So let's start with the first question. When we hear the term socially responsible investing, many think of the term ESG. We've heard a lot about that today. So briefly, can you tell us what is ESG, and is it good or bad for the church?
Okay, thank you for this opportunity, and it's an honor, privilege to be here. ESG, the term itself, I believe the origin of it goes back to the early 2000s when there was a UN report, and I think that tells you a lot. There was a report that was called Who Cares Wins, and that's the origins of the words. And then basically the concept is you're incorporating non-traditional factors into your investment strategy. So specifically related, as we've heard through Andy and through Tim, factors that are related to the environment, societal impact, and governance. So that's what it is. Now, is it good or is it bad for the church? You know, if you would have asked me this question a few years ago, very similar to what Dean Abella was saying, I would say, it's pretty innocuous. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it. But very much to the point that Roger was making earlier, the word has become so toxic. ESG has become so toxic. And so our firm specifically, we renounced the whole term a few years ago. There was a lot of press on that when we made that decision, but not because there's any antithetical reason that ESG is by its nature against Christian or Catholic values, but because it had been hijacked. It had been hijacked by the left, and it would be forcing companies to do things that are not in the interest of shareholders and customers, et cetera, and they're really against the principles of the free market. And so that's what it's become. And so instead of what we originally thought at Inspire was we thought, well, we could just be in the ESG movement and bring a light to that. But we found out we really couldn't do that because anytime we have a conversation, people that didn't even know what ESG meant a while back are now saying, this is just terrible. So one of the really good articles that came out from the Epoch Times that was referring to our renunciation of that was said, get thee behind me, ESG. So that I would say it really ESG it depends on what you mean by ESG. To the extent that it's aligned with biblical values, I don't think there's anything necessarily against that. But to the extent that it's not, and which we've seen that in many cases it's not, then I think it's a danger. And then that's just from a moral perspective. From an investment perspective, I think that it's so much, the focus of ESG is just too narrow. There's so many more things that I think are more important than just 3 factors, right? Environmental, social, and governance. Like, for example, non-traditional factors such as strategy, branding. Those are non-traditional, right? Those are kind of squishy terms, but they're much more important to our organization's health. And by focusing on this panacea of ESG, I think we're losing sight of that.
Well, I think Father ended the morning session with a balance comment. And I think it's probably important that we remember that balance comment. By the way, that's not a statement of support for ESG. What I'm going to lay out is what we believe at CBIS is Catholic Responsible Investments, which we've trademarked since our founding 40 plus years ago. ESG and Catholic Responsible Investing are complementary, but they're different. They are different. ESG, when it's rooted in the right matters, is rooted in risk management. I think Tim made an excellent argument for why it's lost its place. But Catholic Responsible Investments is about faith. It's about values. And they are different. And the difference is intentionality. We can pursue discussions with management. We can have the ability to influence management's behavior, but it has to be collaborative.
I would agree with what my colleagues up here espouse. I can't add to it too much more. The question originally, is it good or bad for the church? I don't think it's that simple. It's neither good nor bad. What it does provide an opportunity is for you in the crowd to engage with firms like those up here on the stage who are going to invest aligned with your values. And that's an important step, and that's an important step you can take. A founding document, which I think we'll reference up here a lot, is the USCCB guidance on investing, which many of you are familiar with. At a bare minimum, that document mentions 4 times the avoidance of scandal. And at a bare minimum, when you're engaging a asset manager who is aligned with your value, you are going to avoid scandal. You're going to avoid the embarrassment. That's the bare minimum we can do. We can take it further, as Jeff, you were just highlighting, with engagement and engaging companies and saying this is what our investor base stands for and this is what we believe in. And that's a powerful message that we collectively can deliver to the companies. So I don't know, is it good for the church or bad for the church? I think it's an opportunity for you as investors to exercise with your finances your beliefs.
Just to complement what's been said so far, I think Specific to this question, in addition to the USCCB's socially responsible investment guidelines, another helpful source, especially on the question of ESG, is Mensurum Bonum of the Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences, and it says some things specific to this question. It points out that some ESG concerns, so again, it really matters, what do we mean by ESG, who's defining that, can cohere with Catholic social teaching. But our focus as Catholics is Catholic social or Catholic moral teaching, not ESG, right? ESG, Mensurum Bonum says ESG is not a synonym for Catholic social teaching. And furthermore, there's no internationally recognized and accepted guidelines for what ESG means, so it really matters. Some of what the Church offers in her moral teaching totally escapes an ESG lens. Right? And we need to be aware of that. And furthermore, the document says you could have a case where a firm scores really high in ESG criteria and yet is engaged in a product or in a kind of marketing that's completely incompatible with the norms of the faith. So our focus is CST, not ESG. Where those things cohere, we can support certain ESG concerns. I think just an obvious example here in the United States, right? In the wake of the Dobbs decision, we've had a lot of corporations saying, well, we offer travel-related health benefits for women who want to seek abortions if they live in a state that's trying to protect unborn human life, right? According to some proponents of ESG, that's a human rights application. According to Catholic moral teaching, direct killing of the innocent is always a human rights violation of the highest order. So our focus is first Catholic social teaching, and then we can think about, does that line up with some ESG values?
First of all, allow me to thank the Napa Institute and the Catholic University of America for the invitation and for bringing me over from Spain over here. Apologies in advance because I have a terrible jet lag. I've woken up at 3 a.m. for 3 nights in a row, so if I speak nonsense, please forgive me. Allow me to start with an analogy for what is ESG. Imagine that you are going to watch the Super Bowl, we were talking earlier this morning, and you are looking forward to have a beer, but you go to the fridge, and unfortunately it is empty. But, knock knock, your best friend knocks at the door, and he comes with 8 cold beers for you, and you open the door. So this is more or less what ESG is like. It's you open the door, but potentially through a Trojan horse. Why? Because the moment that ESG puts the focus on, we were talking before about pagan religions, and if we put the focus on the god of pagan religions, which is in this case could be development or could be sustainability, but completely forgets about human dignity, then I would openly be able to say that it is not good for the church.
I'm pretty confident that I'm never going to use the terms DEI or ESG ever again. And I agree with my fellow panelists here that we really need to be talking about Catholic investing, not ESG. You get, 5 people in a room and ask them what their thought is on ESG, you can't even get them to agree on what ESG is. And I think we can all certainly agree here that ESG, as it's commonly known out there in the world, is not something that we all want to ascribe to. So let's now shift our focus to what do we want to be paying attention to. As Catholics, I think it's very important that we do put our money where our faith is. I think it's very important that we understand what the companies we're investing in stand for, what they do, how they treat their employees. All of these issues matter. What they produce obviously matters. And I would say also that that some form of faith-consistent investing is incredibly important for Catholics and for the Catholic Church. We saw what happened last night when we took Jesus out to Times Square and the amazing response that we had from that. Well, what would happen if, as Catholics, we collectively put our money where our faith is and made a statement to the world? This is how we invest, this is who we are, this is what we stand for. Couldn't we then really kind of take on that ESG world out there and turn it on its head? Say, we are Catholic, and this is what matters to us. I think when it comes down to what matters to us as Catholics and our investments, I think it's very important that we pay close attention to the USCCB guidelines in this regard. And you have a little handout there. I thought I had a sample of it here somewhere. Oh, yeah. So the USCCB restated their guidelines in 2021, and they hadn't done that since 2003, so it was a pretty sweeping change. Turns out that the new document is, I don't know, Tim did a nice piece here as well on the restatement of the guidelines that you also have. And Tim, the original Bishop's Guidelines document, 40 plus pages, something like that?
Something like, well, maybe that, yeah, they're lengthy.
I mean, it's...
You mean the one in 1991?
No, 2021.
Oh, got it.
No, it's tough reading. So we actually went and took the 2003, which was the most recent revision up until the 2021, showed you what's different, what's been added, kept what remained, and then gave you what's added. This, I think, is a really good little cheat sheet for you when you're looking at wanting to invest in a faith-consistent way, what the bishops are looking at, what really matters to the bishops. And it's true. Scandal is important. Avoiding scandal is key to the bishops. So I think there's a couple of ways that we want to address the bishops' guidelines. One is to make sure that we don't invest in the things that are antithetical to our faith. Secondly, we need to hold the boards accountable to how they're acting on our behalf as shareholders. How are they treating their labor force? Do we have complete transparency as to what they're doing from a labor perspective? This is very important. We've talked a lot today. Tim's great talk about the greatest uplifting of the impoverished has been through capitalism. But we need to make sure that when we address boards, or when we have a fund manager who engages boards on our behalf, what exactly are those conversations about? With respect to BlackRock and Larry Fink, we know it's about BlackRock holding the feet to the fire and getting those corporations to make significant changes. But there are other fund companies out there, several of them are on this stage today, that actually do the flip side of that. They're not there to demand that these corporations make changes and comply to their will. What they're doing is they're making sure that there's complete transparency, so that even in the emerging markets countries where human labor is very cheap and individuals are abused in various different ways, human labor infractions is a big issue there in the emerging markets countries. I just want to give you a little bit of heart. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. ESG is a term that has taken on incredibly negative connotation, but in a Catholic, through a Catholic lens, screening, engagement can be very powerful tools toward advancing the goals of the bishops and the goals of the Catholic Church.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to take a little bit different perspective. I think ESG is horrible for the church. Innovest, the firm that I lead, is a consultant. We're an independent fiduciary. We're a secular firm, probably different than most of the firms up here. We manage $45 billion in assets for cities and counties. We have over 100 cities and counties and a lot of nonprofit organizations with a large number of those being faith-based. We diligence managers. We want to make sure they're good investors. We pay a lot of attention to culture. We really like to find firms that are engaged in human flourishing. And then we want to make sure that they screen portfolios appropriately. A lot of these firms do a great job in screening out abortion and pornography and practices that are antithetical to the church. But the large majority of investment assets that are being managed by the church, managed for the church, are not up here. They're managed by firms that have values that are very antithetical to the church. So the last step in our due diligence process is asking questions to money managers that manage assets for dioceses, for foundations, for religious orders. Do you pay for abortion for your employees in your benefit plans? There are firms out there with Catholic in their name that pay for abortions in their benefit plans. Do you pay for abortions across state lines? Where are your donation dollars going? Are you donating dollars to organizations that are in conflict with the church? And I'll give you an example. We were hired by a Catholic foundation, a $200 million Catholic foundation. Part of their assets were managed by a firm that I believe probably manages perhaps the most money on behalf of Catholic dioceses and other organizations. Their top firm that they donate their own dollars to is Planned Parenthood, number one. Number two is Seattle Pride, and number three was Portland Pride. We asked the question, why are you giving money, why are you donating money to these organizations? And they told us, well, frankly, we believe the Catholic Church is backwards, and we believe that we can influence them. We were just referred another Catholic foundation, $100 million Catholic foundation, 50%, $50 million of that is managed by this firm. We asked about religious liberty in the workplace. What is your stance on religious freedom, allowing your employees to practice their faith? What is your approach to culture? We just were hired by a university, a Catholic university. We were replacing a firm that recently told their employees that they have to take crosses and crucifixes off the wall, put their Bibles in their desk. If you're wearing a cross or a crucifix around your neck, you need to tuck it in your shirt. They manage a lot of Catholic money. So is ESG bad for the church? It's really bad. A lot of these firms have moved to the left. They're chasing ESG, they're chasing DEI. There are firms like our firm that like to promote the LBGT managers that they found that can manage money very well. They sponsor organizations that are very antithetical to the church. They're happy to manage money for the church, but they're really focused on the alphabet soup. And they're, in many ways, I believe they're snubbing their nose at the church. And I think that it's incumbent on church leaders to find firms that not only can manage money in a morally conscious way, in a Catholic way, but have the values that are aligned with the church. And ask those questions. Very few firms ask those questions, and the reason they don't ask those questions is because they can't answer them in a positive way themselves.
Thank you, Rich, thank you all. So our next question is, who should be making the decisions about values constructed portfolios within a diocese or a Catholic organization? Should it be the investment committee, C-suite level of church diocesan staff, or bishops? Do you want to start to go down again?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick this off. I'm not a canon lawyer, but I believe canon law says that technically it's the bishop is responsible for the temporal goods in the diocese. So, however, there is a specific canon, I think it's 1277, that says you also need to consult your finance council on matters of importance. So, technically it's the bishop, but in reality, I think it goes back to what we were talking about before with subsidiarity. You need to put the people in place that are closest and are most informed to make the right decisions. So the way I've seen it work effectively is you have a bishop who's involved, maybe not an expert in investments or that sort of thing, but is involved. Obviously, they would have that knowledge of Catholic social teaching, but then also competent investment professionals, maybe 4 to 8 individuals there that are well-versed in investments, but then making sure that hopefully all of them, but at least some of them have that background in Catholic social teaching. And I was on the plane ride over, I was reading Dr. Abella's business catechism. Wow. If every single investment committee member were to read that, I think that would be an excellent foundation for being effective on an investment committee.
Thanks, Tim.
So I'll weigh in on this. I think you're going to get a range of emotions on this one, and I think there's a lot here. I agree with Tim strongly. The church leadership needs to take leadership. I probably differ slightly from Tim on where the voice should come from. There's a tremendous amount of resources in this business that has studied these matters for years, decades. And the church leadership needs to forge the right relationship with the asset management and the investment consulting businesses so that they can get that perspective. I actually am quite concerned about investment committees. And the reason I say that is we serve 850 different investment committees around the world. They get trapped by squirrels. My wife reminds me it's easy for a hunting dog to look at the squirrel. They can get on one matter very quickly, and that matter can overtake the entire discussion, and they lose track of what's important. The bishops, the leadership of the church has a broader perspective, and the industry has a broader perspective. And I think those two together is a quite powerful force. I'm not trying to diminish the investment committees, and Tim's right. Oftentimes the investment committees report to the financial center, whatever they may be called differently in religious communities versus dioceses. They still have a role, but they have to make sure that they don't get lost, and oftentimes they do get lost.
I kind of would echo exactly what Jeff would say. I guess the only thing I would add is this: when you set the bishops have to set the tone at the top, and it's up to us, the service providers, to execute on that tone. And all investors are really looking for three things when they hire either a consultant who then allocates the assets to an asset manager like ourselves who buys the stocks and bonds. They're all looking for three things. One, you need to hire a stable organization. Right? You don't want to hire an organization that has a lot of personnel turnover or regulatory events or something that's going to leave you at ill at ease. The second thing you need to do is hire an organization that's going to execute the investments in the way that they have told you they were going to execute the investments. Right? And the third thing every investor needs is good investment returns, good competitive investment returns. Those are the basics. In this room, investors require a fourth thing, which is the social doctrine. Right, which is executing in line with your moral values. That comes from the bishops at the top, working through the investment committees, in the consultants and the asset managers they hire. And it's that fourth component that makes a difference for the folks in this room and the diocese and the Catholic affiliated assets that we manage.
I'm going to echo my fellow panelists here. I think the answer to this question is all of the above, right? We do need, as Tim said, we need the bishops to to exercise leadership, bring their knowledge of the church's teaching, dare I say, maybe assisted by a moral theologian now and then, if the bishop requires it or requests it, but also people with the actual financial expertise and investment. And you need to put those things together because they each have a particular kind of competence. And so you only get Catholic values-based investing when you have all of that represented. The moral teaching of the church with prudent financial decisions. So more, I think.
This is a very interesting subject from which neither the clergy nor we laymen can hide from, in the sense that the church has the authority on theological and moral matters, but not on matters that require technical knowledge. We cannot ask the church to provide us with a solution to cure cancer, right? On the other hand, we laymen, we cannot hide either. I remember the words from St. John Paul II on Christi Fidelis Laici encyclica, where he says that we laymen, on the new circumstances in social and in economical life, in political life, we cannot remain idle. We cannot hide either. So, answering to this question that you're proposing, Daniel, I would say that each diocese, each institution has to make the homework and find out which is the best solution. But definitely a hybrid where the ultimate responsibility falls into the clergy because in order to follow the canon. But we laymen, we need to make us disposable to our parishes, to our foundations, to our congregations, so that we can help them out in order to take decisions. I was having a conversation the other day with a new administrator for one of the biggest congregations in Spain, and he said, the two biggest problems that I'm facing now are two: ignorance and fear. Ignorance because I have been elected administrator for 6 years and I don't have a clue about numbers. That's it. I became a religious person because I wanted to have a spiritual life and serve God in this specific charisma, but not to manage the proceeds and the wealth of the congregation. Fair enough. But ignorance, there is a big antidote for ignorance, which is formation. Clergy, bishops, priests, maybe you are not asked to be experts in finance like laymen can be, but it does actually help to get some sort of formation. And that is actually one of the things that is being done in the Spanish dioceses, so that the new priests in the seminars get actually formation, because they are actually going to be the ones managing the proceeds. And the second one, which is fear. Fear to put on the table that maybe in the past things have not been done properly from an ethical and moral perspective. So if you recognize that you made mistakes, you have fear to embarrass yourselves and to embarrass the diocese or whoever is the entity. My dear friends, I think that we should have no fear. These are other words from St. John Paul II. And if the tools are available, if there is a chance to make decisions better, and there is information on the table that was not available 10, 15 years ago, let's go for it. That would be my suggestion.
I echo most, if not all, of the sentiments that have just been presented on this topic. I would just add to it that when you are searching for an advisor, that you understand what the role of the advisor is, what that advisor brings to the table, and the role that that advisor is playing. I would strongly encourage any investment committee, any bishop, to work with a fiduciary advisor, because that's the only way that you can really know that you are getting good, solid, independent advice that's in your best interest. I would also add just to that, as a point of housekeeping, make sure that you have a good, solid investment policy statement in place, that you understand in advance what your objective is for the asset pool, and make sure that that's clearly documented with a roadmap for those that come after you to be able to follow. This is very, very key. One of the ways that committees run afoul is by not having that investment policy statement in place. And what happens in that case, if you have any sort of market volatility, then the investment committee all sits around the table and they start looking at each other and say, this is the church's money, what do we do now? So we want to make sure that in that instance, you've got a good game plan in place, you know the expected outcome, and that everybody keeps cool and calm through turbulence, or as Borja mentioned, fear.
So we believe that it should come from the top with education, like most everybody has said. Couple quick stories. One, we were referred a foundation, and the bishop said he wanted a 100% compliant portfolio, and when we looked at the portfolio, they owned a lot of Vanguard funds. So Vanguard does not screen out abortion in their investment products. Even in their socially responsible products, they don't screen out abortion. And the investment committee chair said, well, they're substantially Catholic in the portfolio. So there needs to be education on what that means. We were also referred a diocese, and the bishop said that he was focused primarily on green because all the other stuff doesn't matter if we don't have an earth. So bishops have different perspectives, but thank you.
Thanks.
He's from Mary's state.
Thank you. So we have about 5 minutes left for the panel, and then as Q&A. I wondered if anybody on the panel had an example of engagement with a firm that resulted in the firm acting more in conformity with Catholic and Christian values. This is a particular emphasis in the new guidelines. Anybody want to share?
Well, since I've talked about that twice, if you guys don't mind, I'll start this off. About 3 weeks ago, I was on a call with Molson Coors, and I think Molson was mentioned earlier, so I'll give you an insight as to how I believe engagement can work in a positive fashion. So we were with both secular asset managers as well as asset owners having a conversation about the use of water. It takes 42 gallons of water to make 1 pint of beer. Molson's is actually not, they're quite accommodating to the discussion because they recognize that needs to change. But we were there serving as a conduit between them and other beverage providers that are having advancements that Molson is not making. When we got done with the conversation, Molson actually thanked us and said, we're going to go back into our board and share what Coke is doing and share what Evian is doing and others because you've educated us. It's not combative, and I know that there was a lot of ESG discussion about combative. This is collaborative, and I wanted to share this example with you so you can see what corporate engagement can be like in the positive. But they said, we can't pick up the phone and call those other organizations. We get it from you. And I believe that that is what corporate engagement from a Catholic point of view can be.
I think that's a great example. It's that active engagement, and our experience engaging in companies, not Molson Coors is just highlighted here with other companies, has been similar. They are very receptive to hearing your input, and they appreciate it, frankly, because they don't get a lot of unfettered feedback. So it's a real opportunity. I think we all do on this panel, we all do a very good job of avoidance investing. We avoid companies that are explicitly antithetical to our beliefs. The next step there is doing exactly what Jeff just highlighted, and our experience has been very positive with companies that we actively engage in.
I will share one that we're going to get ready for a little bit of a fist fight, if you don't mind, and that is Apple. And Apple has technology that could protect children. And Tim knows, because Tim's been around this for a long time. A couple years ago, Apple CBIS was the only one at the table and said, Apple, you guys have to do more here around protecting children. And 2 years ago, they made accommodations to do that, but they have walked away from those accommodations. So we're getting ready. Now we've got others with us that we will be going to the table with Apple saying, no, you made promises. We're going to hold you to keep those promises. In fact, now we want to up the bar a little bit because the technology is moving fast on this child pornography issue. And Apple can be part of the solution. But what we have to do, sometimes we do have to get a little aggressive. And what we have to do here is point out that they have technology that can protect children and they have the moral right to do that.
I've got one I'd like to share if we have just a couple of minutes. So I'm not a fund manager, I'm an investment advisor, but I work with fund managers. And the fund manager that we use for our Catholic Value Screen portfolios has a very large presence in the emerging markets space. Their Catholic Value Screened Emerging Markets Fund has about 5,000 companies in it. So there's lots of opportunities for engagement in these with all of these companies, 5,000 to choose from in the emerging markets. There's a lot of dirty stuff going on there. But this story, I think, just really captures the value of engagement from a Catholic perspective. So this company is called Top Glove. They're out of Malaysia. And in July 2020, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection placed import restrictions on products coming from Top Glove. So in the height of the COVID pandemic, July 2020, 4.7 million latex gloves from Top Glove land at the port of Kansas City, and the shipment is held up. The gloves cannot leave the dock. They're stuck there, and despite the fact that we were all, going to Costco and seeing that there were no gloves available to us, they had 4.7 million of them sitting on the docks that couldn't be used. Well, why did the Customs and Border Protection Agency restrict this? Because they had found evidence of forced labor practices at the company, including abusive working and living conditions, debt bondage, and even confiscation of identity documents. So while these individuals are working in the factories, making the gloves that we need that are sitting on the docks, they're suffering from these types of labor conditions. This is pretty deplorable. So the fund manager goes and engages the company. Oh, by the way, when the news comes out on this, the share price naturally drops a whopping 40%. So the fund manager, who has a vested interest in getting this situation sorted out and quickly, goes and engages with Top Glove and asks them to disclose how they are going to be fixing their human labor issues. And so through engagement, the company sought to learn how the company oversees and manages human rights risks in its supply chains and what was being done to prevent the issues from recurring. Several months later, the company publicly disclosed information about its efforts to improve worker health and safety and announced that the Customs and Border Protection Agency had lifted the restrictions on these shipments. So we all got our gloves, their laborers got better working conditions, and miraculously, the share price went up. I don't see any downside to that. So I think that's a magnificent example of what good engagement can do.
Tim, do you have something to add?
Well, yeah, this whole topic of engagement gets me really fired up. I think there's a tremendous opportunity, and some of the emerging issues that we've been focusing on are religious freedom of speech, discrimination, and so I'll just give an example of something we worked on this past year, and we partnered with Alliance Defending Freedom. I see Daniel over there. But we worked with the major, I don't know if all of you are familiar with the whole issue of debanking and deplatforming that's occurring within the financial services, where people's accounts, like Senator Sam Brownback, I think he's a practicing Catholic, but his organization, his pro-religious organization, had their accounts closed by JP Morgan Chase for no reason. And it's not just that instance. There was another instance of Bank of America closing the account of a nonprofit that was helping widows in Uganda. For no particular reason, they didn't explain it, they just closed the accounts. It's a big problem, and I think this is where people of faith can really step up. So we engaged, I think, 100 companies on this issue, and it was only after we filed resolutions where they started, okay, well, we don't want to have this resolution appear on the ballot, and we'll talk to you. To Jeff's point, it was not adversarial. It was actually very fruitful conversations that we had with M&T Bank and Fidelity National Services, where, for example, M&T Bank, and this is a point I think everyone needs to keep in mind, we have friends in high places at these companies, practicing Christians that need a little, nudging, right, on issues of importance. So we actually, with our coalition partners, we helped them draft a policy that respected our wishes as Christian investors in their discrimination policy. So I think those are some emerging successes, but there's a lot of opportunity to engage. It's something that we're really passionate about.
Great, thanks so much. So we have time for about 10 or 15 minutes of questions. We got someone over there. Oh, one there too.
Thank you very much. This is a really awesome panel. I work in financial services, and so seeing a group of men and women that care about Christ and also helping people make the right decisions is heartening. In the work that I do with nonprofits and Catholic organizations and Catholic families, I've noticed that it's fairly easy to use screening, virtue screening, or whatever ESG version you're talking about, for publicly traded companies. We can do that fairly effectively, and even for fixed income. One problem that I've identified is it's very difficult to find this level of scrutiny for investment choices in the private markets and the alternative investment spaces and real estate and whatnot. Have any of you started to grapple with the problems of private market investing or alternative investing, since that is the majority of nonprofit and foundation investing, and it really hasn't crept into the Catholic asset management space for dioceses and other institutions? I'd love to hear your comments on that, please.
So we invest in alternatives, and it's got to be qualitative. We think that as Catholics, you can invest in real estate. You need to understand the culture of the companies managing the real estate portfolio and the types of the sectors that they're in and who their tenants are. But it's qualitative work. Farmland, timberland, private debt is attractive from a Catholic point of view. There's some very good firms that manage Catholic debt that stay away from sin stocks, but there's no dial that you can move up and down. Hedge funds, I would say, are problematic in the Catholic world. If anybody has a good Catholic hedge fund, come see me, because we can't find any. There are some that are beginning, they're burgeoning, but there aren't many out there from our perspective that work well.
I would add to that, our experience on, to your point, it's a very good one. Hedge funds are very difficult. I think private equity funds, you can also find very good ones. The challenge becomes, the obvious challenge is twofold. They tend to be blind pools. You don't know what the investments are going to be when you commit monies up front. And second, they're illiquid. So once the investment is made, you can't get out. So to my earlier point, that avoidance of scandal becomes a challenge. The upfront homework and the upfront due diligence is really critical in that. And if you ask the right questions of the fund managers on the private equity side or the real estate side, you can align with managers who are in keeping with your policy. It's all about the upfront work, and it is it's looking at their track record, it's asking the tough questions, and it's finding managers who align with your goals. They are out there.
Yeah, let me say one more thing about private equity, and we agree about private equity. It can be a good investment in the Catholic space, but you have some firms that like to buy good companies managed by good Christians. They roll up companies and then they sell them to the secular world. And we struggle with that with a lot of private equity funds that, I mean, they might be focusing on those that have their people flourishing, but then they sell them to the secular world, and there's, you know, it's, that's what's happening in the money management business. I think we're the 5th largest employee-owned consultant in the country. We were the 20th about 5 years ago, and it's not a function of us necessarily growing, it's a function of everybody selling to the secular world. And that's why they're comfortable in managing money for Catholics and the other side. It's like what Father Mike said yesterday, either you're a friend of Jesus or you're an enemy of Jesus, and many of these firms try to straddle both.
This is a very good point, and I take the word from Rich, because we're talking about investing, but what about divesting? That is, when a religious institution has to sell, especially real estate, who are they selling that to, right? So that is a question that I put on the table. Maybe that could be, that could build another panel, Daniel, not for now, don't worry. But that is something to be looked into as well. That is my impression.
Great. Thanks. We have another question? Oh, is there? Do compliant portfolios perform in line with their respective industries?
In indices.
Indices, sorry.
If I may answer, because probably different to my peers here in this on this table. In the U.S., we don't have license to offer advisory services, so we're just a research firm. The results of the analysis that we do is, I can tell you the following, which is, there is absolutely no principle of causality that if you invest in compliant companies, you will get a better performance. The causality comes from the talent of the portfolio managers. But this means that if you choose good portfolio managers, there is plenty of room to have a portfolio that is at least as profitable as any other conventional portfolio.
So we've been lucky enough to do this since the early 80s. And so we have a track record. Tim knows this. In fact, Tim worked on this quite a bit in his time. Tim used to be at CBIS. We miss him dearly. But so we are able to compare our sub-advisors' performance before our screens and their unabated performance. And we can compare those two. And we can look back almost 40 years in doing that. I agree, there is no cost, if you would, to doing good. The two portfolios essentially perform at the same level. There are moments in time where they dislocate, and occasionally dislocate by a fair amount. But those are very, very rare. Over the extended period of time, those two portfolios essentially deliver the exact same value.
And I would just add to that, that when you have a substantially diversified portfolio and you have similar risk exposures in terms of asset class exposure and similar number of companies, you're really not going to see any significant difference over long periods of time. To Jeff's point, there will be some tracking error in short term. If, for example, if we're underweight in healthcare and healthcare does really well, you'll see some tracking error there. But over long periods of time, we don't see any difference.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. Yes. My question is from the hedge fund perspective. Is there a Catholic moral teaching on working with derivatives and options markets or holding a short position, even though as part of an overall portfolio risk management strategy, even though those positions aren't directly creating jobs or creating wealth in the immediate future?
One, I give you my take. I'm sure that my colleagues can share more. It depends a lot. It doesn't matter that much on the product itself that you're using. it matters the intention behind. When you get short an equity, what is the background? Is it just, are you betting on it? Is it pure speculation? You have more probabilities if you get short, for example, on a hedge fund, on a certain equity, to get mistaken and not follow the social teaching of the church, because if you follow the teaching, basically what you want to do with those proceeds, with those talents, with that money, is to support a business in order to grow, to create employment, to offer better services, etc., etc. But if in a hedge fund, where in many cases what they do is shorten positions, that is not achieved, and it falls more into the field of quick, rapid gain, okay, under the speculation prism or umbrella, rather than on long-term investment to support a business that makes sense. That would be my take.
Great. Do we have one final question back there?
Yeah. Hi. Good talk. Thanks. Could you talk a little bit about materially changing away from, let's say, an index fund, an S&P 500 or something like that? What's the cost of doing active management? I looked up a couple of funds and they looked like they were 98% correlated with the S&P. When you guys create things, are they materially different? Are they worth the fee structure? How do you build a fund organically from raw materials from the ground up?
So I can address that. The portfolios that we build are actually based on passive strategies or index funds. So they're very low cost, very diversified. So typically, believe it or not, our screened portfolio implementation tends to be even less expensive than a non-screened implementation, just because of the nature of the structure of the fund. So that looks like it's about 0.23% for a global diversified portfolio, or 23 basis points. So it's very low cost. And you know what they say in investing, you make what you don't spend.
Okay, we got one last question.
So with the change from the 2003 guidelines to 2021, there was a huge increase in the focus on climate change environment, right? There's a big section saving our global home. And I don't know if the companies who, need to check the ESG box realize our focus on the E part, right? You can have many definitions for E, or ESG, but E is environment. So is it possible to get that engagement discussion, kind of what Jeff was saying, by starting it on E, and then I know we're very different on S, but kind of opening the door that way, and then at the course meeting be like, hey, you want to talk about S a little, that kind of thing. Can you start that discussion that way?
Well, I guess you guys are probably expecting me to answer this. CBIS has been the program manager assisting the USCCB since 1991 in writing those. I think the answer to that is very simple. The directive came from the church leadership. The process starts by polling the church leadership on what's important to them. So I don't know if any of us are in a position to influence those. In fact, candidly, that would be, from my firm's point of view, that would be a bad thing, because the church leadership needs to determine what's important to them. And those matters came from that polling process.
I would just add that new emphasis is the U.S. bishops are reflecting a development within Catholic social teaching itself, a greater emphasis on responsible stewardship for the environment by John Paul II, then Benedict XVI, and now Pope Francis. But I would say that when we talk about E, the human person is still at the center of our thinking there. Pope Benedict and Pope Francis use the term integral human ecology, right? We have to think about the way in which our care of the world around us impacts human life and the human person. So we have a different vision of E, even if we can find common ground with other people who are pursuing care for the environment.
Following up from what John was just mentioning, there is a methodology in social teaching of the church in order to determine whether something is good or not. which is following the three-step approach of see, judge, and act. I certainly believe that when it comes to the E, to the environmental, that is the methodology to be applied. And especially, my suggestion would be not to follow whatever ESG rating agencies are saying. Because we can see that for the same company, different rating agencies are showing absolutely opposite results. So at the moment that you can value and you can assess a company following how they treat and whether their activities and their practices respect human dignity, that should be the focus, at least under our approach, on how to take a position on the E part.
All right, great. We ran a few minutes over. My apologies. Thank you so much to our panelists.
There's so much here to even attempt to summarize, so I'm not going to do a large summary except to say that it's a very important issue. It's not sort of like the appendix to investment anymore. To have that socially responsible investing is really a priority for the bishops, really a priority for us. And of course, both the avoidance part and the engagement part are really, really important. I was a university president for 11 years, and I can tell you the investment committee hardly ever considered such things. And today, when we're really looking at this in light of ESG, avoiding the negative side of ESG and really trying to use our engagement and avoidance possibilities, you can see from these great panelists today that this is something that every investment committee should be engaged to do so that we can move forward. So my thought is really clearly to say to the panelists, thank you so much for this great advice in helping us to really change the direction of things. So that we can include this in our investment committees. There are just as many errors of omission than commission, and so we don't want to omit how important these social guidelines are, avoiding the negative aspects of ESG, yet at the same time really using engagement and screening to make sure that we are engaging properly with the kinds of strength we have in our corporations. So thanks so very, very much, everybody, and thanks to all the panelists once again. Really appreciate everything you've done for us today. Right now, we're going to... we're going to have a break right after just a note from one of our sponsors, Sanctify, and they're going to proceed right now. 10-minute break to follow.